afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. As you know by now, my name is Ashley Achard. I am an assistant prosecuting attorney here in Raleigh County. And I've been presenting this case to you with Tom Truman, who is our current prosecuting attorney. We are here in the matter of State of West Virginia versus Natalie Cochran. And if you all will bear with me, I will have to do some reading as we go. There's a lot of ground to cover here, so. The first thing I want to do is thank you for being here. Just very briefly, I know everyone does this, but this has been a long couple of weeks, and we've had a lot of evidence come in this case. So just thank you all for sitting through it with us. Thank you for being here, and thank you for deciding this case. Now, at this point, you all know why we're here and what we've been doing for the last few weeks. My job today is to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt that this woman, Natalie Cochran, feloniously, willfully, maliciously, deliberately, and with premeditation, killed her husband, Michael Cochran. This entire tragedy can be summarized into 3 different blocks of time. September 29th of 2017 through August 26th of 2018, September 1st of 2018 through January 30th of 2019, and January 30th of 2019 through February 6th of 2019, the week that Michael falls ill for the last time. Now, Michael Cochran was 38 years old at the time that he died. He was a father, a husband, and a son. He was a very fit and healthy man. He cared a lot about what he looked like and a lot about what people thought of him. He lived and worked here in Raleigh County. As you've heard, he worked in technology. He also worked with Workforce West Virginia. Ultimately, he was a minority partner in the Business Tactical Solutions Group, in which his wife, Natalie Cochran, was the 51% majority owner. And we'll just briefly talk about TSG. We don't have to get too far into it, but I feel like we need to cover that ground again. TSG is represented through its website to be a leading supplier to the Department of Defense, national security agencies, federal civilian agencies, prime contractors, and nonprofits worldwide. And we've heard a lot about how the business ended up not being super legitimate. In fact, it wasn't at all. But it originally was set up that way. They had filed with the Secretary of State, it had a business license, and it actually was registered with the federal government to bid on government contracts and to be awarded those contracts. It was held out to be a woman-owned small business, which gave it priority in getting contracts. But a business like this required one thing: startup capital. There was 2 ways that the business obtained startup capital, and that's the money that's needed to get it off the ground and get things running in general. The first way was through investors. And what would happen was Natalie would go to her friends, her family, people in the community, ask them to invest in this company. They were promised a return on their investments when contracts were ultimately fulfilled. They'd get more money back than what they put in. And sometimes, when the money would come back, she would ask them to invest again so they could get an even higher return on their original investment. So some of these people were putting money into this company over and over and over again and seeing very little payout, if any. The other way that TSG gained startup capital was through loans. She would apply for small business quick capital loans. And what that means is these were rescue loans. These were for companies that were in trouble. They would have a very high interest rate, and you would have to pay back on them daily. And now, I'm not saying that Michael didn't know about investors and didn't know about loans. He knew people were investing. He knew there were loans. But they weren't what he thought they were. Some of the loans, he was told, were SBA grants. What's so special about a grant is that you don't have to pay the money back. That money is given to you for a specific purpose. Otherwise, he thought they were getting government bonds. Specifically, Natalie held out the loan companies to be factoring companies. And what factoring companies do is they buy all of these accounts receivable that you have, and they'll pay you for a portion of them, and then they'll collect the money later. So that's what she told him was going on. So what happens next is about August 26th of 2018, Michael really discovers the extent of family investors and investments. You heard that he got into Natalie's phone at one point and read her messages, and that's how he found out. He was completely unaware of the lucrative returns and profits that were being promised to people. He was quoted as saying she was giving away our money. On August 27th of 2018, Natalie sent a message to a few family members, which we've put in evidence and you all have seen. Hey guys, after the contracts that are out pay off, I will have to stop subcontracting. I wasn't as transparent with Michael as I should have been. After this, Michael and Natalie made rounds to family members, trying to pay some checks, trying to pay some people back. But ultimately, Michael realizes that the amount of money that they owed people is a lot more than he knew. So now he wants to be more involved and understand how everything works. On August 27th of 2018, Natalie sends Michael this message, this series of messages. 3.45 million should post tonight at midnight. 300,000 should post Wednesday. 1.25 million on Thursday. 724,000 Monday of next week. And 2.56 million next Friday. You've heard that Michael was spending money. This is why. This is why he was so charitable. You heard that he donated a weight room to a middle school. He bought uniforms for youth sports. He bought a house for a youth pastor who had nowhere else to go, and later rented that house out to Chris Davis's recently widowed aunt. He was trying to give to people. And he'd been led to believe that this legitimate business was thriving and all of this money was due to them. She set a prize date, though, when she did this. All their hard work was going to start paying off at midnight. So what did this ultimately do? It created a big problem. It created a bunch of promises that Natalie couldn't fulfill. And those promises totaled, at this time, $247,499,232. So in our next time frame, Natalie starts to claim that the government is conducting an audit of TSG. And she uses this as a reason that they can't pay money to investors, a reason they can't get contracts, they can't get paid on outstanding contracts, and the reason that they're not seeing any returns. So she solicits 2 more investors. One of those was Chris Davis. He told you about that. She obtains 3 more rescue loans. On October 25th, Natalie tells Michael the audit is complete. We're going to have our money October 29th. So what happens right around that time? October 31st, Michael goes to the hospital. He's expecting $248 million on October 29th. The money isn't produced. On October 31st, he's sick. He goes to the hospital, and he gets discharged, but he's not well, he's not better. And the defense would have you believe that Michael was incredibly sick all the time, that he left the hospital, went back to the hospital because he got sick all over again. No, he was sick one time, he just didn't get better. It happens all the time, all over the world. When Michael went back to the hospital on November 2nd, Natalie reported that he had had a seizure. That was never confirmed. You heard experts testify that the seizure activity in the records was reported by the defendant. Everyone else who testified said they had never seen him have a seizure. At that time, he had his friend Chris Davis take him to the hospital because he wanted to be treated. Nobody wants to feel the way that Michael felt. But other than this, he was healthy. You would think that he was sick, though, because he was stressed out of his mind. Because he was waiting for $248 million that had been promised to him that he hasn't seen. But it still isn't coming. And there's a whole lot happening during this time. A phrase that we've been throwing around a lot on our team is that Natalie Cochran involved everyone and included no one. So on December 4th, BB&T is closing the Cochran's accounts. Michael goes to BB&T, and you've heard about that. He is irate. In fact, his friend Chris Davis is called to come down to the bank because Michael is causing such a scene that there is fear the police are going to be called. He's angry because he thinks these accounts closing is why he's not seeing any money. So ask yourselves, if Michael was involved in a felony-level financial crime involving hundreds of thousands, at this point hundreds of millions of dollars, why would he go cause a scene at a bank and potentially get the police called on him? He didn't know what was going on. And this is where Natalie gets lucky for the first time. On December 6th, the government's already partially shut down and is only funding certain departments. Now, I'm sure we all remember the government shutdown because it was a really big deal and a lot of people had a really hard time because of it. On December 22nd, the entire federal government shuts down. So we've gone from an audit to a federal government shutdown, buying her more and more time. And the shutdown becomes the reason that they're not getting paid. Now, Natalie has told Michael and all the investors that the money's frozen because of an audit. Now, the government's shut down. Next, she tells people she has cancer, chronic lymphocytic leukemia, which we talked about that a little. We've never found anything that indicates that that was real either. She now has to deliver. So she tells Michael and she tells the investors, on February 1st, the federal funds will be released because the shutdown has ended. So why does the money come in on February 1st? It's January 30th of 2019, and we have entered the week of Michael's illness and ultimate death. So here's where she gets sloppy. Her motive to kill him becomes very clear because he is very quickly catching on. It becomes very obvious who's been running the company, that Michael has no idea about the Ponzi scheme. And more importantly, we're seeing that Michael's about to discover the truth of everything that's been going on. So she has two choices. She can come clean, or she can go into self-preservation, which requires that she take him out of the equation and make sure he never finds out what was happening. January 31st of 2019. Natalie says, I'm on the phone with Bank of America. Michael says, are we 1,000%? Yes, she's sending them with tracking. Money is supposed to hit tomorrow. February 1st of 2019, the fund release date told to investors and told to Michael, no funds hit any accounts. This was a Friday, so Michael knows at this point Monday is the next day he can do anything. So, on Monday, money isn't in there. More excuses. Michael is getting increasingly concerned. Later that same day, she says that she spoke with the wire department. All of this money is about to come through. 4.8 million in the morning, 23.8 tomorrow sometime. Michael says, shit, can't do anything today. Michael was just like the rest of us, as you can see. Doesn't make any sense. I certainly don't think it makes any sense, ladies and gentlemen. And that's because nothing he was told was true. So let's get into Michael's motive. February 4th of 2019, Natalie sends Michael a text message. I'm at the pharmacy. Need anything? Now, if you'll recall from Dr. Halsey's testimony yesterday, on February 4th of 2019, Natalie was picking up her prescription for Xanax, which Dr. Halsey also testified is a benzodiazepine. Michael is allergic to benzodiazepines, as you've all heard. On February 5th of 2019, Natalie goes to Access Health and sees Dr. Halsey with flu-like symptoms. She says she's vomiting. She reports a fever. She's negative for the flu and strep. She got a steroid shot in labs that day. Now you'll note that this is the doctor who, she said, put her on such a high dose of steroids. That was her words, high dose of steroids. As we'll later see her tell Jennifer Davis. But he didn't give her a prescription for insulin. And you heard his testimony yesterday that he didn't instruct her to get insulin. On this day, she also requested methylprednisolone from Stephanie Hamilton. Now, we all know that as Solumedrol. And if you'll recall, a vial of methylprednisolone was later recovered from the Cochran residence when the search warrant was executed. FBI analysis told us that that bottle had never been used. The same day, Natalie reaches out to Albatross Air, the Kearns family, and schedules a flight for her and Mike to take the following day to Lynchburg, Virginia. We've heard a lot of talk about that flight. You heard from Court Nexon, who is a former Bank of America employee. And he told you that the Cochran's account was never funded. There was never money in their Bank of America account. Mike couldn't understand why. So sure, they were going on this trip to fill out signature cards and things like that. But they were also going to find out why contract funds weren't posting to this account. Why all of these wire transfers we've heard of were not coming through. And if they went on that trip, it would have changed everything. So on February 6th of 2019, the last day that anyone sees Michael Cochran conscious, 6:34 a.m., Natalie Cochran texts Chris Davis. She tells him she can't go to Lynchburg because she has a fever of 103 degrees. Now you'll recall she asked Stephanie Hamilton to bring a thermometer over because she apparently didn't have one. 6:35 a.m., Natalie texts Josh Kearns at Albatross Air, cancels the flight to Lynchburg because she has the flu. Mike tells Natalie to tell Court Nexon and his boss that they won't be there today because she's sick, and they'll come tomorrow. But if they still need him to come today, Mike will go, and he'll take his friend Chris Davis with him. They'll come back and get her signature card notarized. Mike very much wanted to take this trip. 6:37 a.m., Mike tells Natalie to get Court Nexon to wire them $5,000 to $10,000 from their account. The account that is still sitting empty at Bank of America. Natalie tells Mike she's already canceled the flight, and he tells her to reschedule it for the next day. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is the text canceling the flight to Lynchburg, wherein Natalie says that she's been up all night with the flu, which we all know she was never diagnosed with. Later on February 6th, she sends this text message to Michael. I'm in the doctor's office getting swabbed again, getting a Prometh shot, getting you and I both meds. Now Mike is currently out and about in town. He goes and gets some Starbucks at 8:37 in the morning. Natalie arrives at Access Health at 8:10. And she says she's getting them both meds. Now you heard Dr. Halsey testify yesterday. He didn't see Michael that day, and he did not prescribe anything for Michael that day. In fact, the only medications that Natalie was prescribed that day were promethazine tablets. Promethazine, which Michael is critically allergic to. So what did she tell him that she got him? And isn't it interesting that Natalie Cochran runs straight to the doctor at the first sign of trouble? Frequently. But let Michael Cochran lay on the couch for 6 hours, unconscious. And let's ask ourselves how Michael was feeling around this time. Well, you remember Jason Bowen telling you he, quote, felt like he was being poisoned. She later texts Jennifer Davis, we are both sick. So they put me on such high-dose steroids, I have to start taking small insulin shots. Gonna have to order a vial. Again, there's no records that support any of this. There's nothing that indicates that she needed insulin for any reason at all. And if Mike was really keeping insulin in the house for his bodybuilding that everyone keeps talking about, why couldn't she use that? Why would she need to get it somewhere else? And I'll also add, the last text between Michael and Natalie Cochran is at 8:51 a.m. on February 6th. Following that was a 15-second call at 8:52 a.m. And this is the last time we know of that they spoke with each other. Later on, as we all know, Jennifer Davis offers up a vial of insulin because she's a good friend. She's worried about Natalie. She thinks her friend has cancer. She thinks that she's dying. She's doing everything she can to help. So she offers up her own son's vial of insulin. Natalie sends another text to Jennifer Davis. Mike's sick today too. He didn't get anything prescribed for him. He didn't go to the doctor. All that we've heard is that he laid on the couch for a couple hours. Chris Davis shows up a little while later, and as we all know, drops off a bag, which he testified that he never looked in. His wife, Jennifer, told us exactly what was in the bag. Some Propel, a Diet Coke that Natalie asked for, and a brand new, unopened vial of Humalog insulin. Jennifer says, "You're welcome, but that's nothing. I sure wish I could do more for you." And Natalie's words are, "That was perfect." And I bet it was. Another message she sends Jennifer Davis. Mike was so mad this AM about not being able to go today. He had to take 2 of my blood pressure pills. Now, the last documented communications from Mike's phone, 11:15 a.m., John Hamilton told you he called and didn't get Mike. He leaves a voicemail message. 1:39 p.m., which you heard testimony today, we believe Michael was unconscious at that time. A text goes from Michael's phone to Matt McCormick. "Should be good, buddy. I'm available all weekend too. Whatever works best." "12:29 on February 6th of 2019, Natalie Cochran takes this photo of her husband Michael laying in their kitchen floor. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but if my husband had a serious medical event and was lying unconscious in my kitchen floor, I wouldn't be taking pictures of him. I'd be getting help. The first person she sends it to is her sister Penny, who testified that her reaction was, "Well, what does she want me to do about it?" And I think we all know the answer to that question. Next, she reaches out to John Hamilton, who you heard testify a few days ago. She tells him, "Mike is sick like last time. Last time when he asked to be taken to the hospital. Last time when he wasn't left unconscious in his kitchen floor." John heads that way, and Natalie then calls her private contractors, Jason Bowen and Jonathan Miller, to come to the residence and help. You heard Jason testify that they were at Lowe's at the time. The story he was given was that Michael threw up in the sink and then used the kitchen cabinets to lower himself to the floor. Jason and Jonathan arrive, and they move Michael to the couch, and Natalie begins reading them vital signs that they can't see. That includes his blood sugar. Why would you check the blood sugar of someone who doesn't have diabetes or any known problems with regulating his blood sugar? Ladies and gentlemen, I'll posit to you that if he were just sleeping it off like she wanted him to do, he would have felt that finger stick. I've had 100 finger sticks. I know what they feel like. You're not going to sleep through that. At that point, she reports that his blood glucose is 145, and this is at 1:06 p.m. John Hamilton shows up shortly after that, maybe 20 minutes after she contacted him the first time. He told you that Michael was already laying on the couch when he got there. he immediately asks, "How are we going to get Michael to the hospital?" Natalie's response is to let him sleep it off. She now tells him that Michael was sick and had a seizure. John noted that he had never seen Michael have a seizure. John then contacts his wife, Stephanie, who is a physician assistant, as you all heard. He asks her to come over and, quote, get her to take him to the hospital. So Stephanie arrives a little later and takes Michael's temperature. She made it a point not to startle him and even warned him that she was going to be taking his temperature. But he doesn't wake up. Stephanie also tells Natalie that Michael needs to be evaluated. Natalie again declines and says Michael wouldn't want to wake up in a hospital. Stephanie even gave her an out. She said, he can blame me. Also, at some point during the day, Natalie and Mike's kids come home from school, and Natalie's sister, Penny Lowry, arrives. Penny told you that Michael had an accident, and she held a blanket up while Natalie changed him into dry clothing that was retrieved by Natalie and Michael's daughter, Nicole. Thomas Treadway shows up later. When asked if he believed Michael needed to go to the hospital, he told you he's not a medical professional. Natalie's text messages indicate otherwise. They indicate that he believed Michael was getting worse and that he needed to be checked out. So you decide. At 4:34 p.m., Natalie reports that Michael's blood glucose is 115. Now, she tells others that Stephanie Hamilton took that reading, but Stephanie Hamilton took the stand and told you that was not true. Lastly, Chris Davis, Michael's best friend by all accounts, arrives at the residence. He told you how he ran his thumb up the sole of Michael's foot to see if he could startle him awake. He told you that he tried a sternal rub. Nothing. His words to you were, he is going to the hospital, and I'm going to take him. At that point, he and Thomas Treadway load Michael into the back of the Cochran's car, where Natalie rides with him as Chris drives him from 4H Lake Road to Raleigh General Hospital. When Michael arrives at Raleigh General Hospital, his blood glucose was 21. That's a far cry from 145 and 115. Seemingly, it's plummeted out of nowhere. You heard from Dr. Uribe and Dr. Krieger. The only reasonable explanation is exogenous insulin administration. And ladies and gentlemen, the defense has posited to you that if Natalie Cochran injected Michael with insulin, whoops, rush the needle. Here's the good news, I brought it back up. He would have felt it. Now, this is an insulin needle.
Yeah, I'm going to object to this demonstration. This is bringing outside the evidence before the jury.
This is a demonstrative exhibit, Your Honor?
Well, it is a demonstrative exhibit used in closing arguments. Members of the jury, you are the judges of the evidence. This is a demonstrative exhibit. I want you to rely upon your recollections and your memories of what the evidence has been in making your decision. There's a certain rough and tumble that we allow and some latitude in terms of closing remarks. I'm going to, as I say, overrule the objection and permit counsel to proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to see the size of an insulin needle. That needle I just showed you holds 30 units of the kind of insulin that Gavin Davis was prescribed and that was received by Natalie Cochran from Jennifer Davis. Dr. Krieger told you how small a unit of insulin is, and you can see it for yourself. Extremely small. I would also say, we made it pretty clear yesterday that the defense experts did not have the full picture. They had incorrect and incomplete information, so how could they make an informed opinion? And when Michael arrived at Raleigh General, as I said, his blood glucose was 21. He was immediately intubated, and he never woke up. February 7th through 11th of 2019, Michael was transferred to Charleston Area Medical Center, CAMC. His MRI there, as you've heard, showed diffuse hypoglycemic encephalopathy, brain swelling caused by low blood sugar. February 10th of 2019, Michael is transferred to hospice care at his wife's request. He spends 5 hours there before he dies. Now you'll recall during Thomas Treadway's testimony that he advised Natalie needed to remember that she took his vitals that day, and that she needed to make a timeline of the events leading up to Michael's death. Why? Here's some of the different stories she told. Michael was sick in the sink and fell. Michael was sick in the sink and lowered himself to the floor. I heard him hit his head, and when I went in there, he had fallen. She also said he was vomiting in the sink, had a seizure, and then hit his head. And that's just a few of the stories we heard. Now, a search warrant of the Cochran residence was executed on June 25th of 2019. And I would note that TSG has continued business up to this point, even getting additional investors after Michael's death, including the Hamiltons. During this time frame, Natalie also pled guilty to the charges that you heard about in federal court, the wire fraud and unlawful monetary transactions. During the execution of that search warrant, a lot of things were found and taken from the Cochran residence. Of note for us was the unopened methylprednisolone vial and the insulin that she kept in her refrigerator. Now, if you remember when Lieutenant Bledsoe testified, he told you that when he reviewed the property receipt from the search warrant with Natalie Cochran, she flipped through it and immediately went to the insulin. And she said, "I keep that for my neighbor's son who has diabetes." Ladies and gentlemen, as I stated previously, the elements of first-degree murder are a felonious, willful, malicious, deliberate, and premeditated killing. Felonious is simple. Murder is a felony, and it's against the laws of the state of West Virginia. Willful or deliberate would mean that someone took an overt action in furtherance of an anticipated result. She injected Michael with insulin. Dr. Krieger and Dr. Uribe testified that there was no alternative, reasonable explanation for Michael's blood sugar to be 21 other than outside insulin administration. She also let him lay on the couch for 6 hours. She brought in all this help over and over just to refuse it. Malicious, showing or having a desire to cause harm. Natalie was a diabetic counselor and a pharmacist. She knew that injecting insulin into a non-diabetic would cause harm. She chose over and over, after repeated pleas from friends and loved ones, to leave Michael on the couch, laying in his own urine. She also showed a complete indifference for human life when she continued to work on contracts and make plans for bingo while her husband lay dying in the hospital. Premeditation. She obtained the murder weapon in advance from Jennifer Davis. And poor Jennifer had no idea what she was getting herself into when she did that. She had a clear motive, and you saw that leading up to this date, Michael was about to find out what she was doing to people. Do we know what he was going to do with that information? We never will, because he won't have the chance to tell us. Michael was killed because following the actions of the defendant, he was admitted to multiple hospitals and ultimately passed away at hospice. Well, there's a couple of defense theories that I just want to go ahead and debunk while we're here. The first being, Natalie was a pharmacist and could have gotten undetectable drugs to kill Michael. Those were defense counsel's words. She did, just not as a pharmacist. She hadn't worked in pharmacy for 2 years at that point. Insulin can be bought over the counter. Stephanie Hamilton debunked this one. She testified that Humalog, the kind of insulin that was used to kill Michael, cannot be bought over the counter and has to be obtained via a prescription, which neither Natalie nor Michael had. Michael was a, quote, ticking time bomb. Michael's previous illnesses can only be verified by Natalie. No one else ever saw him have a seizure. Sure, he went to the hospital, but they were never actually able to verify that seizure activity occurred, only that it was reported at home. By her own words, Mike was doing the best he had ever done in his life. You heard testimony that he forgot where he parked his car. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know about you, but I forget where I park my car all the time. It's very common. He participated in tough man competitions and Jeep pulling competitions. It doesn't sound like a sick man to me. You also heard that Michael was on steroids. Chris Davis testified that Natalie told him that she was in charge of all of his supplements and vitamins. No steroids were recovered from the Cochran residence when the search warrant was executed. The Mexican supplement that we've heard about turned out to be a female fertility drug that came from Florida. You know who had communication with that company? Natalie Cochran. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, Natalie Cochran had the means, knowledge, and opportunity to commit this crime. She dosed Michael Cochran with insulin that he was not prescribed and that he did not need. You may not have done the math, but I have. Next Thursday will make 6 years to the day since she injected Michael Cochran with insulin in his home. 5 days after that will be 6 years since Michael Cochran left this earth. 6 years since 2 children lost their father. 6 years since this woman, Donna Bolt, and this man, Ed Bolt, lost their son. 6 years since they were able to see him for the last time. Michael and the people that loved him deserve to have the most thorough investigation that we could conduct. And we've done that. We've done everything we could to show you what really happened to Michael. These people have waited long enough for justice. Michael has waited long enough for justice. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm asking you at this time to deliver that justice and to find his wife, Natalie Cochran, guilty of the first-degree murder of Michael Cochran. Thank you.
About 2 weeks ago, when I stood in front of you, I told you a couple of things about this case. And one was that Natalie Cochran was guilty of financial fraud, of financial shenanigans, and that she was indeed guilty without any reservation. But we're not here today to retry that case. And everything that the state is telling you about Natalie Cochran, yes, let's have some light.
That was me, sorry.
Thank you, Judge. Everything that we've heard about this financial case from Natalie's standpoint is true. She was convicted. She was a participant in the Ponzi scheme. But we're not here to judge her yet again on the financial crimes. We are here to judge her on a murder of her husband. And the state cannot prove first-degree murder against her beyond a reasonable doubt. The state cannot prove three things. The case cannot prove what, the case cannot prove how, and the state cannot prove why. First question, what was Michael Cochran killed by, or what killed him? And you've heard the evidence over the last 2 weeks that we don't know. The experts that the state brought testified to what they themselves admitted, a definite maybe. Maybe it was the insulin shot, and maybe not. The experts that the state brought testified to, we cannot determine the objective factors, the objective anatomical findings, and tangible demonstrative evidence what killed him. They don't know. The state's expert, Dr. Krieger, said, well, the hypoglycemia due to the insulin administration is a strong possibility, but it's just a possibility. Why don't we know what killed Michael Cochran? Well, because they did not perform the autopsy. And by the time all these experts got the evidence, Michael Cochran's body was so decomposed that it is impossible medically to determine what killed him. And you heard the testimony of two defense experts. And you also heard the testimony of my compatriot, Dr. Piotr Kubicek, who is the medical examiner who performs autopsies on a daily basis, and who is, I would submit to you, a little bit like Matlock. He is the medical detective trying to detect what is the crime that led to the death of that particular individual. All these experts said the same thing. The cause of Michael's death is undetermined. We don't know. Now, the state cannot answer or prove beyond a reasonable doubt the how. How did that happen? How did this murder happen? I'm not particularly good with syringes, but, well, we'll come to that. The state wants you to believe that there was an insulin shot injected into Michael that killed him. But then the state also tells you that it could have been more than one insulin shot, because when Michael arrived at the hospital, his sugar level was 21. And the experts told you that it's impossible to have that type of sugar level without being pretty much continuously shot with insulin. So, how did that happen? Well, let's follow the state's theory. This cold-blooded killer is planning a murder of her husband with the insulin shot. In that regard, she is calling her friend, Miss Davis, asking for insulin on the day of the injection of that insulin. I might just as well have asked for a gun. I might just as well have asked for a murder weapon. Jennifer, I'm trying to kill my husband later today. I need the insulin, and I'm trying to kill him with insulin. I need you to bring me some insulin. Is that the action of a planning cold-blooded killer? She would get that insulin ahead of time, not on the day of the murder, and involve 2 witnesses against her right there and then, who came here to court as predicted and testified that that was, and they gave her the insulin. And then, how on earth did she inject that insulin into Michael? Well, let's look at these facts. Did she approach Michael from the front when he was facing her in the kitchen? And if she had the insulin injection in her hand, wouldn't he have the time to react and say, what is going on? Let's assume for a moment. Then she approaches him from the back when he's standing in the kitchen, and she jabs him either in his back or his rear end. Well, she has to have a couple of seconds to inject this insulin in him. Basic human reaction would be to turn around and face the assailant, be it his wife or be it some cold-blooded killer, a stranger. She wouldn't even have time to plunge in insulin into his body without him turning around. And he's an athlete. He's this huge guy. And here's his 5'1" or 5'2" wife who's injecting him with insulin, and he doesn't react. That's why I said it didn't happen in silence. My first reaction would be, what on earth are you doing, woman? Or whatever he calls her. What are you doing? And then, somehow, he drops there in a fetal position in the kitchen? No, that didn't happen that way. Of course it didn't. So now, you heard the evidence from at least 4 or 5 witnesses that this type of insulin acts in a delayed way. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, up to half an hour. If I'm jabbed, even by my dearest wife, or by somebody else with a substance, and if she is silent, that's one thing, and if she tells me, this is for you, you son of a gun, I hate your guts, whatnot, here it is, I'm killing you, I would have 10 to 15 minutes, maybe to 20 minutes, to 30 minutes, to call 911, to run to the hospital. I told you, 7 miles from the hospital. He would have been in the, I know it's February, but he would have been in that hospital sooner than you can say hello, sooner than you can slap a tick. He would have been in that hospital asking for help, an immediate sugar reaction or sugar injection to bring that insulin level to some normalcy. He wouldn't have taken it in silence. He wouldn't have just dropped down on the floor. So how did it happen? Well, the state then gives you an alternative, because now they're changing their theory. That may have happened in bed. Oh, that's a novel idea. Inject him in bed, he would not have reacted? Of course he would have reacted. He would have gotten up and he would have done the same thing. He would have taken himself to the hospital, he would have called 911. He would have probably not been particularly happy with Natalie, but that doesn't mean anything. He could have saved himself. So then the state changes the theory again. That may have happened upstairs, or it may have happened on the couch, or he's injected on the couch. Well then, okay, so he doesn't get up, so who takes him into the kitchen and puts him in this fetal position? That didn't happen, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. And how do we know that? He fell in the kitchen because there was one witness, and he hit his head against the counter because there was one witness, and that was the sister of my client, who told you that she saw a dent, a fresh dent in the counter, in the kitchen counter. That's where he hit his head, and that's how he fell on the ground, on the kitchen floor. But not because of some insulin injection, but because of some unknown condition that was caused, or may have been caused, by many, many, many different reasons. Now, then, continuing with the cold-blooded killer's action, she does not do anything but call all kinds of people to the house. Now, wait a minute. You have just decided to kill your husband. He is unconscious, let's assume, and you want him dead. Well, let him die then. Don't do anything. Or maybe put a pillow over his head and kill him. But do not tell me that you want to kill your husband and then you call 2 workers right there to bring Michael onto the couch. The sister and her husband, the state trooper and his wife, who is a medical assistant, and then Mr. Davis. Is that the action of a killer who wants to get away with murder? No. 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 And then, and again, I told you, that's the kicker. Then he dies, and she wants to hide all the evidence. She cremates him. And then all the evidence is gone. All these Dr. Kubitscheks and everybody else can look at all that evidence. No, they can't, because he's cremated. That's how you, I guess, kill somebody the way the state believed it happened. But it didn't happen that way. And then the ultimate question, and the question is why? Throughout this case, the leitmotif, the state's main motif in this case was Michael didn't know anything about this business. Didn't know anything about Natalie's shenanigans, financial, the fraud, the deception, the lies. He didn't know anything about it. Well, I think that from the very first day, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've realized that this is not the case. But let's assume for a moment that Michael is indeed blind and doesn't know anything about millions of dollars, hundreds and thousands of dollars. He doesn't realize where all that sudden wealth came from. Doesn't know anything. And then he finally finds out. Let's assume that he finds out. And then the state tells you that he would do what? Well, the state cannot tell you. And the question is, what would he do? What would he do that would be so bad that would require Natalie Cochran to kill him? I mean, scenarios abound. You find out that your spouse is cheating the government, cheating the investors. What do you want to do? Well, you probably want to say, come on, let's get a lawyer. Let's get an accountant. Let's try to work it out. Let's call these investors. Let's try to pay the money back. Let's file for a bankruptcy. Let's maybe even talk to a friendly prosecutor in Raleigh County. Maybe you'll have to do a little bit of time. But not run to the federal government and complain. What, was he going to kill her? Was there any evidence that she launched this preemptive strike against him because he was going to kill her? Or that he was going to do something to her? Divorce her? What? What would be her motive to kill him? Why? She may have been afraid that he would be mad, but to kill him? To eliminate him? From what? From doing what? From going to the federal government? From complaining that my image is so tarnished now in the community that I want to divorce you and you will be penniless and all of that. There's no evidence of that, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. What triggered this murder? The state cannot answer that question. But if you had any doubts about Michael being involved in this scheme, and if you believe that he was, then the state's entire case collapses. Because she, Natalie Cochran, would have no reason to kill him. Because he, Michael Cochran, was as involved in this conspiracy as she was. And how do we know it? Well, he was working on these contracts daily, on these federal contracts daily. Even when he was hunting with his little son, he had a contract that he was working on. He was working on the contracts when they were in bed. And I'm not talking about anything sexual here. I'm talking about family. She's watching the TV. He is working on the contracts. Their little son with them, sitting between them, realizing that daddy's working on the federal contracts. He signs the checks from the company. He has access to everything, every bit of information that goes through this company, checks, contracts. He has access to all of that. And besides, is he really living on a different planet from Natalie? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if I suspected my wife, we are, well, unless I'm in court, we're home. We're together. We spend time together. We communicate. Wouldn't I ask my wife, honey, where is all this money coming from? All of a sudden, I'm not working. I'm this computer tech guy. You're not working. All of a sudden, we're buying 2 boats. Well, the investors, yeah, but now we have 3 houses. Now, we just got back from Paris. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the evidence of incredible wealth, incredible injection, maybe that's a bad word, injection of wealth that Mr. and Mrs. Cochran had in 2018, 2019, maybe even 2017. And that came from the investors. And the investors dealt with Michael individually, just like his parents. They gave him some $44,000. He knew that there were no contracts. What contracts were they? What contracts were there? He didn't have a clue about some of the business, I'm sure. But he had deep, profound knowledge of how much people invested, who was going to get paid for what, federal contracts. He had deep, profound knowledge of it. I'm sure there were some aspects of this business that he may not even know about. And I'm sure that Natalie was involved in this. But she is not here on trial for fraud. She's here on trial for murder. Well, let's look at the state's case. And mind you, the state has a very heavy burden, and the burden of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt. Well, the state brought the evidence of the pilot who says, well, the flight was canceled. Okay. The banker turned mind reader. He had an idea why the flight was canceled, but of course he didn't. He is mad at Natalie because he had to do all that research for the company and didn't get paid for it, I'm sure. And for him, time is money. So they didn't fly to Lynchburg. Well, Natalie went to a doctor. She was sick. I think that the state attributes all these nefarious things to her, but isn't it just plain obvious from Dr. Halsey's testimony that she was sick? She was sick on Friday and she was sick on Saturday. And what did he give her? He gave her a steroid shot that increases blood sugar. So she's calling her friend, Miss Davis, to get her some insulin to maybe level off the sugar, blood sugar. What's so unusual about it? No, it's nothing unusual about it because she, Natalie Cochran, had a long-standing relationship with the Davises, who had a misfortune, a tragic misfortune, of having a child who was diabetic. And Mrs. Davis came here and told you, no, Natalie never had any insulin. Oh, really? But then when we confronted her with the pharmacy records, she said, oh yeah, Natalie could pick up the insulin. But she was bringing it home. Well, what if you weren't home? Yeah, she doesn't explain it. Natalie could keep it at home. That was nothing unusual about Natalie having insulin. And you know what? The state wants you to believe that this insulin, that bottle of insulin that was found, was the weapon, the murder weapon. That somehow it was punctured and she kept that bottle as some kind of sick souvenir of the murder. Is that what the state telling you? I submit to you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, if you look all you need to look at is this humologue that we introduced in the exhibit, as an exhibit. I'll submit to you that a blind fool would tell you that this bottle is full. This bottle is full. There is nothing in this bottle that has been taken. There's no bubble, no nothing. The bottle is full. I suspect I know what happened, why there's a puncture. All these FBI gentlemen got that bottle and maybe had taken a little sample of what to determine what it is. That may be the puncture. But otherwise, the bottle is full. We're not going to sit here and speculate. They find a vial of insulin that is full 4 months after the demise of Michael Cochran. And then, that's part of their evidence. Remember, Mr. Bledsoe, telling you at the end when we finally pressed him, is there any evidence? Is there any evidence that the bottle that you have was the murder weapon? And the answer was no. And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the lifelong condemnation of this woman versus complete exoneration is at stake. The stigma of conviction for murder versus letting her go free is teetering in the balance, and the state has the audacity to come here with an item that is not the evidence, and they're trying to tell you to convict this woman of murder based on something that is not the evidence. Is that the case that the state has the audacity to bring before you? Well, let's look further. Chris Davis and at least one other witness, Mr. Treadway, and Penny Lowry, knew that Michael Cochran was taking all those steroids. Steroids maybe. Maybe they were steroids. Maybe they were not steroids. Maybe they were anabolics. We don't know. Michael was taking substances by the fistfuls. And they can say that, oh, we have isolated one little vial and that was some hormonal thing from Mexico. No, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. He had a cabinet full of medications. He had a cabinet full of that, away from the family, away from the cabinet or a place where the family stored the medication. He was getting this stuff online. He had the United States Postal Service box where he would get all that stuff. And I submit to you that this was not some one deal Mexico thing. And there's nothing wrong about Mexico. This was, however, the problem. He was getting substances that were not approved by the American government, by the, the Food and Drug Administration. He was getting substances that were going to increase his physique, his appearance. But my God, they could have done some serious damage, and probably did some serious damage. One of them was not even for human consumption, as the children told you. There was just a sample of what Michael Cochran was taking. And what he was not taking was the medication that was prescribed to him by the physicians. And yes, he had all kinds of conditions for which he had the medication. He had Keppra, he had all kinds of serious medications which he didn't take because he believed that all the doctors were quacks. He believed that they were not the people to be trusted. Chris Davis and Mr. Treadway and Penny Lowry tell him, you have to stop this stuff. You really cannot do this. And what does he tell Penny Lowry? She testifies. He said, "Oh, retarded Penny. What do you know? I'm gonna do whatever I want to." The state makes a big deal out of Michael not being taken to the hospital. But you have witness after witness who told you that Michael not only believed that the doctors were quacks, but he hated going to the hospital. He vowed to kill somebody if he's ever awakened in a hospital. And why? Because he considered this a waste of time. Now, he had all kinds of problems that he went to the hospital with, and within the last 3 months of his life, he went to the hospital 3 times. October 31st, and then he stayed there for a day. I told him he had all kinds of problems. Then he went back to the hospital with pretty much the same conditions that he had now, and stayed there for 5 days, and then he came out. You heard throughout this trial that Michael had convulsions, seizure-like activity. He probably had epilepsy. The doctors told you that. He had a brain mass that was later modified into the brain swelling, encephalopathy. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, those are serious conditions. They are not to be laughed at. Those are very serious conditions. He retained urine. He had an enlarged heart. He had an acute respiratory failure. He couldn't even breathe because he had a chronic sinusitis. Nobody is here to desecrate or dishonor his life. He died much too prematurely. He died at the age of 38 years. Not for a moment should you think that the defense is taking his death lightly. No. It's a horrible tragedy. Horrible tragedy. But a tragedy, not a murder. It's a tragedy, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. But with all these conditions, Michael was still doing what Michael was doing. Taking supplements, anabolics, substances that God only knows where they came from and who approved them. And he was a ticking bomb. How do we know that? Well, after his second stay in the hospital, at least 3 witnesses told us that Michael's health has deteriorated to the point where Michael was not the same guy. When he was Michael at his best, he was generous, gregarious, going to parties, participating in tough man competitions, lived life to the fullest. He was focused. After his second stay in a hospital, Michael could not find his car in a parking lot. Forget that. That happens to me quite frequently. But that was just one symptom. He could not fix a light fixture with Mr. Davis. He felt confused. The children testified he had constant headaches. He was irritable. He didn't know where he was. Mr. Treadway came here and testified, Michael hated going to Panera Bread with a passion. He hated that restaurant completely. And I know that this is not the case about Panera Bread. But if I hate a restaurant, I'm not going to set foot there. And yet Michael went there and could not even recognize the fact that Mr. Treadway was wearing the same hat that he's been wearing for years. He was confused. There was something going on in his head that made him go where he would never go, and that made him forget who his friend was, really. Now, the state brought before you those 2 FBI agents who, again, could not contribute anything scientific except for that bottle. And the state closed the case with 2 law enforcement officers who are here today. Have you ever seen a more shoddy investigation that took place in this case? They never talked to the children. And I know that the state will say, oh, this was not that important. It was important. The children's testimony was riveting in this case, and I'll come back to that in a second. They did not even check what kind of medication this man was using. And for that matter, they have no clue about Natalie Cochran's medication. And, they tried to convict her in part because she lied about her cancer. Oh, that's a low blow. First of all, we have absolutely no evidence that she did not have cancer. We have the evidence that she was going to seek help from the Cleveland Clinic, from Duke, from the doctors, wherever she could. And knowing our medical system in this country, it's not that you're going to walk into the Cleveland Clinic and you get treatment the same day. You have to have insurance. You have to have all kinds of, you have to go through all kinds of hoops to be seen by a specialist. And maybe when she told somebody, yeah, I have cancer, leave me alone, because she maybe didn't want to discuss her health with somebody, maybe in reality she was checking out whether she had cancer and went to all kinds of doctors and clinics to obtain that health. And the state believes, oh, she lied because she told you that she had cancer? The officers ignored the federal investigation completely. And in the federal investigation, in the indictment, in the forfeiture proceedings, in the federal case, it's the Cochrans who were responsible for the Ponzi scheme. But the indictment didn't come until September of 2019, and Michael was dead I submit to you that the federal government was investigating them both. They can come here and say, well, I saw some cases where the couples were not investigated together. That's baloney. The federal government investigated them both and would have indicted Michael as quickly as they indicted Natalie for the same offenses, because Michael was involved in this Ponzi scheme up to his eyeballs. Let's see what evidence the defendant presented. Remember Nurse Holly, if I pronounce it correctly, Holly, yes. We said that she was at hospice. And what did she observe? Natalie Cochran was with her husband for the last 5 days and held his hand when he passed away. There's evidence that Natalie Cochran got into a car with Mr. Davis. Well, the state said, oh no, she didn't drive him to the hospital. Well, she didn't drive him, but she was a passenger in that vehicle driven by Mr. Davis. She didn't drive him because she was too distraught over his condition, but she still got into the car and held his hand. Is that the cold-blooded killer? Yeah. She also testified that Natalie Cochran was a go-to woman, and I think that she may have used that phrase, or maybe I have used that phrase, when it came to the emergency situations involving Mr. and Mrs. Davis's child. So Natalie Cochran would have to have insulin. You don't treat insulin with a water pill, for God's sake. You have to have insulin to treat it. And if she was a go-to woman, she must have had insulin to treat the Davis's child. So there should be no surprise again that she had insulin in her possession. Mr. Treadway didn't want to talk to the police because he believed they were dishonest crooks. And he somehow, by the way, he got scammed financially, so he had absolutely no reason to be friendly to Natalie Cochran and testify on her behalf. Similarly to all these other witnesses, even her sister got scammed to the tune of about 50 grand, and yet she came and testified for her sister. What did Treadway tell you? Well, Michael was confused. Michael wasn't the same guy that he had been before. And then Penny Lowry, the retarded Penny, as Michael called her. She told you not only about that fresh dent in the kitchen counter, but Michael wanted to pay her back what she owed on the contract. Michael wanted to pay her back. Michael was dealing and wheeling with the money from the investors. He knew about it. She told you, again, the same story, that Michael refused to go to the hospital because he was going to kill somebody if he went back to the hospital and woke up there. And we have all these discussions between 5 or 6 people after Michael collapsed in the kitchen. And then I told you that the children testified in a riveting way. And you're gonna tell us, well, the state probably will tell you they're coached, or they were somehow not truthful. Two tragic figures. 2 children who were young enough to be taken care of by father and mother, and old enough to know what was going on around their house. Nikki testified here unequivocally that her father had headaches, he was confused, had a brain fog, was agitated. In a true, genuine, heartfelt way, she told you that he may not have been as loving towards her as he was towards their son. Michael had a heart-to-heart with her, shortly before he died, and her impression was that her father felt it coming. And what was it? It was death, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Michael felt it coming, and he had this heart-to-heart conversation with her, which she considered heart-rending, and which we would consider his farewell to life, because he knew that there was something irreversibly wrong with him. The MAC, their son, testified too. Dad worked on the contracts all the time, even when hunting, even in bed. And he testified about their lifestyle. He testified about the supplements, the injections, the dropper, the stuff from Mexico, as he called it. Stuff that wasn't for human consumption. He remembered it all. He testified about his father's anger, his father's combativeness, his father's confusion. Now, I want to talk to you very briefly about, before I do that, there was also a brief mention of nootropics, a medicine that came from some shady, well, maybe not shady, I shouldn't say that, places that usually would not be available in your local friendly pharmacy. That was the smart drugs that Michael was receiving at his USPS, United States Postal Service, box. These were the cognitive enhancers, memory enhancers, stimulants. Michael was perhaps a man's man, and he would not admit to any weakness. He was seeking desperately to look great, to be this, I don't know, alpha male, whatever you call it, to be this great, maybe bodybuilder, maybe an athlete. And yet, in all of this, he didn't follow the advice of those who should have given him the advice and who he should have listened to, and instead did his on his own. Now, I want to return for a second to the experts who testified in this case. Let's start with Dr. Kubitschek. All of these experts, by the way, had a number of autopsies that performed. But who was in the best position to tell you about the autopsies? Who was in the best position? Of course it was Dr. Kubitschek. He performed the autopsy the earliest. And with all the help of the state resources, and relatively early in the game, when the body was not perhaps yet decomposed to the point that nobody could recognize the organs anymore. He told you that the cause and manner of death was undetermined. Then there was Dr. Howley, who was not necessarily an expert, but he told you a couple of nice things. One is about Natalie being sick, but he also said something about tablets, the pills, and the state jumped on it. And now the state submitted another theory that maybe Michael was killed by Natalie with pills. For that matter, the state is bringing another theory now that maybe she killed him with the benzos. You heard about the benzos. Now the state says maybe there were 2 shots of insulin or maybe more. Now the state tells you she killed him in the kitchen. Now she killed him in the bedroom. Now she killed him with the prednisone, maybe, and then maybe any other substance. And the state will stand up at the end and tell you that whatever I tell you is a bunch of nonsense. But, ladies and gentlemen, you've listened to the evidence. If the state stuck to its theory that there was one insulin shot, I could buy it. But now the state quietly is telling you, well, we're not telling you that the evidence suggests that the defendant killed her husband with insulin. There may have been pills, there may have been benzos. They're intimating this because they don't have any direct evidence, to which they immediately admitted, but they don't have any circumstantial evidence that fits either. Now, you had Dr. Dragovich, who told you maybe one very important thing, and that is that the decomposition of the body caused the inability of any doctor, for that matter, to assess objective factors, objective anatomical factors, and the findings of any type of specific, concrete reasons for Michael's death. That is impossible. Dr. Uribe believed that there was an insulin shot, but this was just an assumption. It was kind of a bridge to the unknown, and I think that was his phrase. It was just an opinion. Dr. Krieger said, well, we've excluded maybe all the other options, but it's a definite maybe, as we call it. It's a definite maybe. Maybe there was an insulin shot, but we don't really have all that information upon which we can construe our theory. And then Dr. Banerjee came here, and she said, we don't know. She's our expert. Maybe you expected her to say, oh yeah, that was an insulin shot that was responsible. That was some other reason. She didn't say that. She testified like four other experts that we really don't know. But there are other possibilities. There was something wrong with Michael's pancreas. Remember that? He may have had pancreatic tumor. He obviously had an enlarged heart. Arrhythmia. Maybe there was something wrong. Maybe that was the reason. The tests were not done on any C-peptide insulin. No meaningful diagnosis from the sliders that were obtained, or that weren't obtained. Could have OD'd on benzos. We don't know. Benzo overdose, maybe poisoning. Hypoglycemia equals death. Well, all of that. And then, of course, there are other reasons. Medication, alcohol, unexplained medications, liver disease, sepsis, surgeries, immune system. All of this could be taken into account in Michael's death. But the state stubbornly believes that Michael's death was caused by that one insulin shot, which they, by the way, changed and modified to maybe 2 or 3 on all these versions. It's impossible. Impossible, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Now, the state also brings a theory of maybe there's this voluntary manslaughter, that just because she didn't take him to the hospital. No. I submit to you that not taking Michael to the hospital was not done over the period of days. It was a matter of hours. It was a matter of discussing Michael's preferences and will, whether he was going to go to the hospital, whether he wanted to go to the hospital, and what was necessary. We had several people in that house who could have decided. Finally, it was decided that Michael was going to the hospital because he was not waking up. Yes, it took some time. But there was always the hope that he would wake up in his own home, surrounded by family and friends, and everything would be fine. After several hours, yes, it became necessary to take him to the hospital. But that's all. Now, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I told you at the very beginning of this case that this is a complex case. That this is a case that involves medical, banking, scientific, maybe pharmaceutical, maybe business, evidence and information. There are aspects of federal litigation here. And you've heard it all. But distilled to its essence, this case really involves the state's attempt to equate the federal prosecution and conviction for dishonesty and fraud with murder. The state says she is a fraud, therefore she is a murderer. She is a cold-blooded murderer because she is a cheat. That's what the state is telling you. But the state cannot prove, certainly not beyond any reasonable doubt, the what caused Michael's death, the how did that happen, and why it happened. And so at the end of this case, I will tell you that the state's attempt to equate the fraud with murder is like trying to squeeze a square peg into a round hole. And if that one peg didn't fit, then the state switched the theory, and let's see if another peg that is still square will fit into that hole. Oh no, it won't. Well, then we'll switch to another theory. Maybe benzos, maybe two shots of insulin, and it still doesn't fit. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the state will have the last word. In the criminal process, I will sit down and I will not address you again. My esteemed colleagues and friends will get up and tell you that whatever I told you is nonsense. They will give you the spin on the facts and tell you that's the way it is. But I heard a statement once that, and of course when you go to the jury room, since they spoke last, you will have their words in your mind, in your memory more than mine, than my words. But I heard a statement once that it's not the one who speaks last, or trust not the one who speaks last, but who speaks the truth. We have no reason to come here and hide anything from you, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Ms. Cochran should not be perhaps invited home for you to have dinner with her on Sunday. I told you that. She is committed crimes of fraud, crimes of mail fraud, crimes of dishonesty, but that doesn't make her a murderer. And if you cannot answer these three questions, what, how, and first of all and foremost, why, then the state fails to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's why we're asking you to find her not guilty.
You are so close to listening to all the stuff. Be silent on this side, and then you will take over. On behalf of the prosecutors, excuse me. In fact, the prosecuting attorney's office, the investigators, we thank you for your time, your effort, your attention, your sacrifice. Without you, this system cannot work. Can I touch your appointment? I should have asked. I'd like to talk with you about two numbers. And the first one is this one. 0. The defense is right. We're going to tell you that what you just heard is a lot of nonsense. And the reason why it's nonsense is the defense has no credible evidence to back up any of their theories as to why the state is wrong. Let's start out with Michael Cochran himself. They have a very schizophrenic approach to Michael Cochran. One theory of the defense is he was this macho, bodybuilding, fit guy, athlete, Jeep pulling, super stud guy. That's one thing. Now they have some evidence that he was very concerned about his fitness, very concerned about his appearance. We would agree with that. But did that lead to his death? Zero evidence to support that. On the other side, oh my gosh, the guy was a ticking time bomb. The defense words, a ticking time bomb. He was so sickly. He was essentially a guy with 1 foot in the grave and 1 foot on a banana peel. They don't really have any evidence of that either. He was just a normal 38-year-old healthy male. And a good guy by all accounts. So the hospitalizations that they've relied upon to tell you how sickly this man was, where did most of the information come from that? Medical records. Who provided histories for that? The defendant. The defendant told the doctors all of these things about Michael Cochran. It didn't come from other reliable sources. It came from a very unreliable source, her. So his suspected brain mass, his suspected convulsions, his suspected all of these problems, there was no diagnosis of any of those things. They were suspected. And they were suspected because she told them to suspect that stuff. But there was never a diagnosis. Even their own experts confirmed that. There are other witnesses. The fact that the Davises talked to a nurse to have Natalie Cochran, their emergency contact, that's not the same thing as authorizing treatment by Natalie Cochran of any child. There's zero evidence of that. There is evidence on the other side. The Davises told you they never gave the defendant insulin for the benefit of their child. Never. Both Davises told you that. As recently as yesterday, the defense was still putting that theory out there for you to consider. There's no evidence to support that. Zero. Mr. Treadway's testimony was Mr. Treadway's testimony. This is a guy that didn't want to help the police. Even though his best friend was dead, he wouldn't talk to him. And he had some newspaper article he said gave him justification for that. That's on him. Treadway's got to live with that. But he didn't bring anything of substance to this case, did he? No. The two children that testified, they are tragic figures. They have had a terrible 6 years. They lost their dad. For the time being, they've lost their mom. But they were little kids. And their testimony had a certain ring to it. They both picked up on the same word, agitated. That's an unusual word. Rolling back time 6 years, think that the oldest was 20. She was 14 at the time. And that's how she's going to describe her dad the last few weeks of his life, the word agitated. Her brother, the same word, and he was younger than her. There's something odd about that. the state believes that they sincerely believe their recollection. But does it make sense? Would kids that age really be that involved in their parents' business? Would they? Well, it's possible, but that's not very likely. The defense experts, nice people, very sincere, but they're in a little silo. If those forensic pathologists can't cut on a dead body and come up with a smoking gun reason, then their opinion was they won't give you a cause of death or a manner of death. Even though Dr. Banerjee said, oh no, we don't do this in darkness. We look at all the facts, we look at all the circumstances, and the autopsy is just a part of the process of determining these things. But was it? Did she have any facts that were right at all? She had a few, but not many. And in her own report, she said, if other information is brought to my attention, I reserve the right to change my opinion. Well, she had a bunch of other information, but she still wouldn't change her opinion. Why not? That's just her mindset. Did she have any experience in insulin cases? This was her first case, her first one. Like Drakovich, apparently he didn't have any insulin experience either. Now, the defense told you that the state has just gone all over the lot with its theories. Is that your recollection of the evidence? Did you hear any state witnesses say there was one injection of insulin? No. Did you say multiple? Because we don't know. But there are some things that we do know. Let's talk a little bit about how that balances out what the defense just told you. There's a lot of circumstances that need your consideration. First of all, this is a trained pharmacist, a pharmacist who knows about all sorts of medication, the impact of the medication, the dosage of medication. Beyond that, this defendant held herself out as a diabetes specialist. A diabetes specialist. That's another circumstantial piece of evidence to keep in your mind. On February 6th of 2019, on the basis of a supposed counterbalance to her cancer treatment, she needs to borrow a bottle of insulin. Another circumstance that needs to be held in the back of your mind. Because on that day, they were supposed to fly to the Bank of America. And yes, there is a merger with the federal case and this case, and that's where the merger takes place. You heard Trooper Heinzman discuss all of the things that the defendant had told her investors about the money that was supposed to be coming in, the money that was going to be coming in, the money that was almost going to come in, and it never did. Who else did she tell that to? Michael Cochran. So when the defense says, oh, he was up to his eyeballs in this, was he? Does the evidence support that? They have zero evidence to support that theory. Zero evidence. He did live a lavish lifestyle. But if he thought that the money was there for good cause and that the business was just supporting that lifestyle, was there anything wrong with that? Of course not. But this was a person who ran a Ponzi scheme. And the one thing you can count on for people that run Ponzi schemes is they will do whatever they can to keep it going. Is that what she did? That's exactly what she did. She was still shucking and jiving after Michael Cochran died. Right up until they executed the search warrant, she was doing ordinary business. Selling the non-existent contracts, trying to get people to invest. So There is zero evidence that Michael Cochran was up to his eyeballs in this, but this defendant was up to her eyeballs and over her head in this fraud scheme by their own admission. Second number. $21. That's a big number. And that's the number we're going to rely on to convince you beyond a reasonable doubt that this defendant killed Michael Cochran. That number was the number of his blood glucose level at Raleigh General Hospital at 8:30, the day of his collapse. Now, unlike the defense witnesses, the state witnesses were unified and very clear as to what caused that 21 number. Dr. Krieger had 13 likely causes of low blood sugar, hypoglycemia. She eliminated all but insulin. And she's got a good reason for all of them. You heard her testimony. All of those were potentially valid causes of the condition that led to the brain swelling, that led to the death of Michael Cochran, all of them. But she eliminated by logic and by her scientific skills and experience in insulin cases that it had to come from insulin. Dr. Uribe, another experienced insulin investigator. Both of those two were involved in the Clarksburg VA murder cases where a nurse was killing veterans with insulin. Those two were the government's star witnesses. They know what they're talking about when it comes to insulin, when it comes to insulin killing people. That's what they do. So that 21 was never overcome by a single shred of credible evidence by the defense. Not once. No one's told you from the state that there were single injections, multiple injections. We don't know the answer to that. We do know that Michael Cochran's death was caused by insulin and reducing his blood sugar to a fatal level, and the resulting changes in his brain killed that man. Circumstantial evidence is the basis of this case, and let's get it's a nice, straightforward example of what that is. It's January in Raleigh County. You look outside your window and you see frost on your neighbor's truck, frost on the ground. Stars are out, moon may be out. You go to bed. You wake up the next morning and there's 8 inches of snow on top of the truck and on top of your grass. Did you see it snow? No. Did it snow? You absolutely know it did. That's circumstantial evidence. Ladies and gentlemen, the state of West Virginia has dumped a blizzard of circumstantial evidence on this defendant. Until today, 2 weeks in an American courtroom, and until today, you never heard the word justice. Well, do justice for Michael Cochran. Find this defendant guilty of first-degree murder, because that's exactly what she did. Thank you.